So for those who don't know me, my name's Doug. I'm the Customer Success Manager here at Meez. This is our spring webinar series, 2025. We're really thrilled to have you join us today. We're going to be going over a lot of important information about food costing. My background, I've been with Meez for 4 years now. Before that, a line cook, a restaurant manager, a butcher. I've started my own food companies too. And yeah, I'm just really excited to go over this really important topic. I'll kick it over to Sarah.
Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Hassler. I'm the Director of Customer Success and Support here at Meez. Thrilled to be on the first webinar in our spring series for 2025. Definitely timely topic chosen by Sergio to talk about costing today. My background is mostly in culinary. I'm a CIA grad. I ran my own kitchens as an EC and then moved into consulting, specializing in builds and in dietary restrictions. That's what I was good at, designing kitchens and then feeding people who were allergic to everything. It's a weird life before I transitioned here. And I'm going to kick it over to Sergio.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergio, also a customer success manager here at Meez, and some of you might remember me as the guy who sold you Meez in previous years. I've also been with Meez since we launched almost 5 years ago now, and my background is over 25 years in kitchens, managing front of house, back of house operations, working in specialty food wholesale as well as specialty food imports. Mostly cheese, but also olive oil, a lot of fun ingredients. If anybody remembers me from that previous life, I was the guy that chefs had on speed dial for all their fun ingredients. And even owned my own spot in Brooklyn called Brooklyn Larder, which is still there, a beautiful little shop in on Flatbush Avenue in Park Slope, Prospect Heights. So yeah, before we get started too, just a couple of housekeeping items for everybody. Everybody's on mute, so if you want to ask a question, please enter it into the chat. Additionally, many of you have submitted questions ahead of time. We've selected a few that we'll go through today. We're going to try to get to 20 minutes or so, or 15 or 20 minutes of questions at the end of the chat too.
Awesome. Are you ready for me to share, Serge?
Go for it, yeah.
I'm Vanna Whiting this whole thing. Here we go.
All right.
Yeah, and just jumping in real quick, we're going to make sure we send a recording of this webinar out to everybody after this call, so you can review it, you can share it with your team members, and there'll be plenty that with that email we'll have a link to our community with a lot of helpful resources, as well as you'll be on the list for more upcoming webinars that we'll be doing this spring. So it's part of a whole series. Get ready, buckle up.
Yep. And actually, yeah, as Doug mentioned, it is part of a whole series, and we called it the spring series when we launched it, but it's really our 2025 series, because if you've looked at the schedule, we're going to be going straight through the summer every 2 weeks, and we're going to be covering a lot of topics, like starting with what we think is kind of the base foundation here of what everybody is looking to improve their food costs and their profits, of course.
Do you want to click the next one, Sarah?
Next one?
Yeah. Just briefly looking at the agenda, we're here to discuss one of the most critical and often misunderstood aspects of restaurant operations, which is food cost. So we're going to go into, what is food cost, just for the basics, and why does it matter. We're going to look at how tools like Meez can help simplify the process, your understanding of it. We're going to look at what the difference between actual and theoretical is, and how to approach both of those things, as well as menu costing. And very importantly, which a lot of people, struggle with, just kind of much will be a good topic just for discussion, which is, building habits to really help with these items. It's very important to be able to see these figures and all, but it's really the habits of the kitchen, of the restaurant itself, that's going to really make or break this. So, the goal of this webinar is just to ensure that you can walk away understanding what food cost is, how you can figure it out, and how you can improve your overall business with that knowledge. So yeah, next slide. Let's go into Sergio. Let's kick it off. Let's talk about what is food cost. Let's start with the basics.
Yeah, of course. At its core, the big daunting word food cost is the percentage of your revenue that goes towards buying ingredients. It's your cost of goods sold, which you'll hear us referred to as COGS a lot, cost of goods sold, the purchases that make up all the items sold on your recipe, your menu. And then your sales, your net sales versus your gross sales. Gross sales is everything that's run through the register. Net sales is after you take out some comps, discounts, anything like that, of course. So just some basic definitions. We'll touch more on these later. But what we really want to talk about is that all important food cost number per recipe and for your whole menu encompassing everything that you're selling. And of course, all of your restaurants or operations likely have more than one menu, whether it's lunch, dinner, happy hour, wine list, cocktail menu. And all of those, of course, can usually generate different food costs, but it's that important number of your food cost percentage and the consequences of not knowing that number. That's where it gets real, right?
Yeah. So what do you think? What is this, why does this matter so much? What is the gist of why food cost is important for us to know?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the few numbers that when you're building out your operation and you've done your restaurant build out, now it's time to launch. It's one of the few numbers that an operator can really control that can literally make or break your business. Um, you can't control a lot of your overhead costs, your rent or your mortgage payment, your utilities. You can't control minimum wage. You may hopefully pay your cooks more, but there's certain standards set and you have to cover those costs, of course. Your food costs you can dial in, and we're going to talk about that, or we'll talk about that on the next slide, but it's something that you have control over as you design your recipes and your menu so that your recipes and menu become as important as your business plan and your pro forma. They are literally blueprints to how your restaurant, your food operation will succeed. Now, at my shop at Brooklyn Larder, I operated it from 2007 to 2016 or something like that. We were not tracking food costs precisely for the first few years. Once we did on very simplified spreadsheets, etc., outdated spreadsheets, and I think that was one of the questions there, it made a world of difference. But the reason, and to quickly address that question of outdated spreadsheets, they are wonderful and they save you a ton of time on math, of course. But I think everybody who's created a numerical masterpiece in a spreadsheet in Excel knows the pain points of transferring that and sharing that with somebody. And they're going to put the wrong information in the wrong cell. They're going to break your formulas. You're going to have to explain it to them. So ultimately, we're looking to simplify things.
Yeah, I think the thing that we hear the most, I think, in our role here is just people not having the time or wherewithal to see how much their food actually costs. So like the very foundation of this is not necessarily what the recipe is, but rather how much do these ingredients cost and what's the most efficient way to get that information. So yeah,
It also seems so daunting, right, to look at spreadsheets, like, especially when you haven't touched it in a while, you haven't updated the costs, like to go back through all of the different pages in order to get an accurate food cost at the end just feels like this is going to take me so much time. I love that in Meez, we can just do it one ingredient at a time and one recipe at a time, and it doesn't have to be this whole 6-hour project every time I want to update something. Also, live updates are pretty nice.
well, and like what Sergio just said is like you have a lot of different menus. You're not There isn't just one food cost. It's
Right.
all over the place, right? So certain items are going to have a lot higher food costs, certain items are way lower. It might be different based on, brunch versus dinner versus lunch versus the wine menu. Like all of these things have to be juggled. So, using a spreadsheet is, you're always going to be hampered by that because you're never going to have enough
The
time
upkeep.
to update it all.
Yeah, totally.
Well, let's maybe jump into. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Just
please.
before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to touch on that magic number because that's a question that you all ask yourselves. We get asked it all the time in our, role of helping you navigate the software, as well as we wear many hats here. Often my hat is half consultant as well, and we get to ask that question a lot. What should my food cost be? And you probably, if you dove into, manuals on how to run your restaurant or books on how to open and operate your restaurant, there's usually a range given, anywhere between 18% to just under 30%. And that really there's no magic number that works for everybody because everybody has different operating costs, your overheads. And that is ultimately, as we're looking at At the slide here, and we're looking at, this is obviously Meez, but what you can see and what you can calculate, your food cost here is calculated, and then you're able to see this profit, this number here is what across your menu and across your recipes needs to cover those overheads. And depending on, what your rent is, how big your staff is, all of those things, this food cost percentage will be set differently, but it's going to change from recipe to recipe, of course. And overall, when you're looking at your entire menu, you just want to make sure that you are hitting that number and that you are making enough after you're covering your food costs to cover all the other overhead and still have some net profit at the end to
Yeah, I think
create
it's a
the
great call
restaurant.
out too. Like this is one recipe at 22 or 20, almost 23% food cost. That's great. But if this recipe never sells, if this dish doesn't sell, it doesn't really contribute to your menu food cost percentage. So if the dishes that are costing you 35% or 40% are actually more popular, they're going to drive your overall menu food cost percentage up. I'm sure you're going to get into that, Serge, and I'm skipping ahead, but
No
maybe
problem.
we go to the next slide.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide and where we're going to discuss, this question comes up a ton, right? Actual versus theoretical. How do you use this information? How do what is the process for achieving both of those numbers? And then what do you do with that information? So Sergio, with your expertise, what is the difference between the two? Tell us, break it down for us.
Of course. Yeah. So your actual food cost versus theoretical. The words kind of speak for themselves a little bit, but let's start with the left column here. Actual food cost. This is what you are actually spending. It's the invoices, the waste, the transfers, the spoilage. It's messy and it's real. So cost of goods sold. To get technical about it, you start with your beginning inventory, you add your purchases to that, then you subtract out your ending inventory and you divide that by your total sales. That's the very raw formula that gives you, here's our percentage of food costs. Here's how much we literally spent on the goods we sold this month. The contributing factors to that, as I said, spoilage, shrink, servers misordering, misfiring, orders that never make it to the table because they went on the pass and the chef pulled them or the expediter said that's not right or it sat in the pass too long. All those things. Customer returns. And of course, managing your actual food cost requires a lot of operational oversight. It requires boots on the ground. The kind of thing that we wish we could do more often for customers is to be there and get you guys through service and, make sure that people are following the recipes that we all work so hard on, meaning you and our teams, et cetera. Theoretical food cost is what you have more control of. One person or a small team, and as you're building out your menu, you can start building out your recipes with the best optimized food cost for the dishes that you need to sell, that you want to sell. I see your question, Matt. Sat in the pass, like if a dish got put up on the pass and it just sat under the heat lamps too long because the rest of the order didn't come up in time, so it died in the window, is a term that I remember using a lot.
Yes, sadly, me too.
um, So then the theoretical food cost, of course, this is you are building a recipe and you are optimizing from your purchasing decisions and your portioning and the ingredients that you're using to optimize your food cost against your sell price. So you're going to set your sell price based on your food cost. And for anybody that uses Meez, there's a fun calculator there that lets you set any of the factors there.
I like to think about it as your theoretical menu cost, your theoretical food cost is the benchmark for the absolute best that you could do based on all the purchasing decisions that you've made and how you've constructed the menu. So all those decisions that you made as an administrator up to that point, in a perfect world, nobody drops anything. Every server picks everything up in a timely fashion and no customer ever changes their mind about anything. This is the best that you could do. So knowing that that's your ideal, that's that perfect world, you want that to be as good as it possibly can, because we all know that reality is a far cry from that, right? And there are so many contributing factors to an increased actual food cost that you want your benchmark to be as ideally low as it can be.
Yeah. And also you can't really expect your actual to improve without having the theoretical. Like you need to have both, but the theoretical is your, your pie in the sky, and you can't expect your team to really improve what they're doing if you don't have that baseline to know, okay, this is where we have to get to. How are we going to get to it? So they're interlinked in a lot of ways, and equally important if, I mean, maybe not equally, but they're both very important.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, the contributing factors here. We already talked about having recipes accurately costed, data-driven purchasing decisions, as well as a well-engineered menu. So that's what I touched on before of saying you're going to have some recipes that are running higher than optimal food cost. Recipes that have to be on the menu because it's your signature dish or because you're a steakhouse and you have to serve this porterhouse, and we all know that porterhouse word is scary. It's like, just brings up images of 48% food cost or something. But as long as you are able to balance that out and subsidize that high food cost item with some really hot selling items that are at 10%, 12%, some snacks, some, easy wins like that, that's really what that balanced menu is. And we'll get into that where we talk about your stars, your plow horses, your puzzles, your dogs. So yeah, I think, and then administrative oversight, of course, is required here because we want to make sure that your costs are being updated on a regular basis. Every week when invoices are coming in and you have those items that really drive your food costs because they're on all your best-selling items. So you want to keep an eye on those costs and make sure that they're updated in your recipes, and that's keeping your oversight, your visibility of where your food cost is at on your recipes and your menu up to date at all times.
Love it.
Beautiful. Why don't we, before we move on to the slides, Sarah, we talked a little bit about kind of how theoretical recipe costs are important. What are some ways, Sergio, do we want to look into how we can kind of engineer a plate so that we can see what the costs are in the moment, and then how we can kind of play with the recipe to get those costs down? I know there were a bunch of questions before we started about, in the tool itself and Meez itself, how can we engineer a recipe and make sure that the substitutions, the quantities, all these things can be played with to see a proper theoretical.
Sergio, are you going to do a demo here?
Yeah, a little bit of one.
Love that.
Oh, yeah, demo.
Cool.
Yeah.
So everybody loves a good pizza, right? So as we're looking here at our pizza recipe, we have our margherita pizza, we have our pizza dough recipe, and we are making our easy pizza sauce here as well. We have training instructions, images, videos, all that good stuff. And we're looking at our food cost on this pizza. We have all of our items here costed, and we are running a pretty good food cost, but I think anybody in the pizza business knows that we can usually do better on pizza. It's acceptable, but we're talking about stretched out dough, sauce, cheese. So with the calculator here, of course, as I've mentioned, and whoever uses Meez knows that we can set our price, we can set our profit, our food costs, and the other factors will calculate all based off of our food cost. To Doug's point, though, maybe there's changes that we want to make here. Maybe we want to actually upgrade our pizza and we want to stop buying the grated Parmesan that comes pre-grated. And it's a hard thing to part with, though, because it's $5.99 a pound. And it's something that we want to look at and say, okay, well, we're using 2 teaspoons at a time on here. It's really a dusting on this. I'm a cheese guy, as I said before, so I'm going to lean into the difference that using the right cheese on a pizza can make. So maybe we pull up the real Parmigiano Reggiano and we're going to grate that in our restaurant and start using it on our pizza instead. But we want to know, what difference is that going to be really? We're going to do the exact same amount, and we're going to use the prep action grated because we're buying it in blocks and grading it. And we're looking at a difference of 7 cents on the plate, even though the price difference is $6-7 a pound difference.
Mhm.
On the plate, it's a pretty minimal increase that if we take out the grated Parmesan and we keep it with the Reggiano grated, our food cost didn't change much. We're still at 18%, And we just upgraded our pizza, in my opinion, significantly by putting on freshly grated Reggiano, if anybody knows the difference, and nutty flavors and all the different notes that we get there. These are the little things that I love about being able to really engineer a recipe like this. And additionally, then maybe, hey, that difference, maybe we sell 1,000 pies a day. That difference is going to add up, of course. So we might have different ways that we want to cut as well. And, something else that we might do is say, hey, that Bianco di Napoli tomato sauce, that pizza sauce is pretty awesome. And I got my guys making this stuff, spending however many hours. Maybe I make that change as well. And buying the pizza sauce is costing me a little bit more, but it's still, our pie is still under 20% food cost. And how many hours of labor did we just save by buying the pizza sauce? So just one example of how we can really, get into a recipe here and make the changes based on the items that we're looking at. Now, something that we get asked a lot too is, okay, I'm playing with a recipe like this. How do I, plug in the ingredients? And, I had a friend of mine who runs a restaurant here locally actually call this out to me recently saying, he doesn't find it easy to stick an ingredient in the Meez and because we're very recipe driven, but he could always, and this is what I pointed out to him, is you could either make the change if you've already bought like some nice mozzarella that's nicer to upgrade. You could change the ingredient if you've already got that ingredient in your purchased items, or you can always simply make a manual change here and say, what if I was buying mozzarella that costs $8.99 a pound, and I could make that change in real time and see exactly what that would mean for my pizza by simply making that update, and we see that in real time. Now we've hit our 20% food cost. So maybe we stick to the old shredded mozzarella that we were using and keep it just under at $6.99 a pound. But that's a great way to see what's going to happen. And there's no harm in doing that to your ingredient. Think of it as a sandbox because the next time you import your invoice, you're going to have that new shredded mozzarella with the new price or the same product updating its price, and it'll overwrite any manual updates that you've done.
Beautiful.
There's a lot, yeah, there was a lot in there. So feel free to ask any questions as they're coming up. A couple of things that I want to point out or just reiterate. What Sergio is able to do is just use Meez not just as a source of truth for your recipes, but also as a tool for engineering your recipes. So this can be in the development phase, but it can also be while during the middle of the menu rollout, and you're still working on these things. You can just make these edits, make these changes, and make these decisions on the fly based on information you found on your invoices, based on customer feedback. And it's not just about saving money, like Sergio said, it's about increasing the quality of the ingredients too, and knowing kind of whether that's actually going to impact your costs. So all of these are, it's not just the hard numbers, it's often more than that too. And one thing that I keep hearing from customers too is about how important it is to, when you're doing this engineering, is to keep a log of these items. So something, Sergio, if you want to just point to the three dots in the middle there and click on the make a copy.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just to make sure everyone sees that you can make a copy of a recipe really easily right from here if you're doing any of this kind of engineering. If you don't want to mess with like the actual recipe that everyone sees, you can just make a copy of it, and that way you have a little sandbox so you can play with and see what you can do, and then you can swap them out right afterwards. So just wanted to point that out as well.
Yeah. So creating that copy duplicates everything exactly, but now I can start messing around with 2.0. I put it in, like an R&D concept, which is something some of the big organizations, some of you guys are on this call, have set up, R&D and really suss out a recipe, optimize its cost, and then move it into a live concept.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is a great place to ask yourself those questions on is it worth it to make the change to Parmesan Reggiano? And if I do that, should I also make the change to mozzarella? Maybe you decide to only do one, but you're still increasing the quality of your end product and still hitting the goals that you need to hit to stay in business.
Yeah.
Super important.
We were able to keep our food costs at, we moved to a different area, so it doesn't have all the costs there. But we were able to keep the food costs under 20%, making those small changes that are hopefully going to just get people talking about your pizza. Oh my God, either maybe the server came over and grated fresh Parmesan on my pizza instead of having it show up with it, all those things. And you're doing twice as many covers. All of a sudden, they're selling twice as many of that pizza, and your percentage on it only went up by 0.5.
I want to make sure we're moving at a good pace here to have time for questions, Sergio. So for everyone who needs more help with this kind of stuff, just I'm gonna plug our office hours real quick. On Monday through Wednesdays and Fridays, we always hold live office hours in the community. We'll send a link after this for that. So if you need help with just like the nitty-gritty use of Meez, all those things, I highly recommend joining it. It's like small groups, or sometimes it's just one-on-one. So we'll have plenty of opportunities to go into more detail there. So just to jump back into kind of the big picture, Sergio. So we talked about, obviously this is a cost of one dish, but like you said, what if this dish doesn't sell? What if, there's a plenty of other menus. What do we need to do in order to see the bigger picture, recipe costing, menu costing,
Yeah. So the feature, the Meez feature of menus, and in any restaurant, whether you're using a feature like that or not, you should definitely always do this exercise of taking all of your recipes and putting them into your menu. So plugging in this menu, now we'll get to all the dollar figures and everything that we're looking at here, but basically menu item name. So this should match exactly what I'm ringing up at the register. And then we connect these to the costed recipes, of course, as well as ingredients. So we can fine tune some of the amounts right here, or we can dive into a recipe to fine tune them better that way. But either way, this is what is calculating everything, the food cost, the profit margin, the revenue, and then from your point of sale system, you're going to import, of course, the menu items with their sell price and their quantity sold to give us this big picture of your menu and your overall food costs, which, as Sarah hinted at earlier, is not just an average of all these food costs. But if we sell a bunch of these guac and chips at 5.94% food cost, we know that's going to improve. So that's the kind of item that we tell our servers as soon as somebody sat, sell them some guac and chips. This item is going to help subsidize that.
Where are you getting your avocados from, Sergio? There's no way. There's no way.
It's a demo account.
I know. I'm sorry.
Actually, the avocado price is correct. It's the chips that I couldn't seem to get a good price on.
Okay.
So yeah, and you look at this is a very all over the place menu with all kinds of food happening here, but each one of these, of course, can be one single recipe, or this can be, a combination of recipes and ingredients, as we said here. And we're able to fine tune that right from here. As I mentioned before, maybe we decide to change this to 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard, and maybe the chopped liver gets dropped to 2.75 ounces because we're trying to improve the food cost of this item. As I make these changes now, we're going to see that this food cost percentage is going to improve a bit on this item and our overall menu as well, because this is a hot item that we're selling a lot of. We also have the track variance on here, which can help you determine, any changes that you make and what impact they're going to have against the numbers that we imported from last summer. And we're trying to engineer this menu to maximize our profits for this year. So we're going to take maybe, we just made that change on the chicken liver toast. If I had this toggled, you would see the difference. But say we also decide to raise the price maybe by $1. Any of these changes are automatically going to track. And maybe we play the conservative card of saying, well, we might lose some sales based on that price increase. So if we sell less of them, but at $15, are we still making money? Yeah. So that's one menu item down, and we just improved our net profit, our gross profit by, almost $1,000. But then we're probably going to go down our whole menu because we're talking about a year, and a lot of costs have changed over a year, and the economy sure has changed a lot over a year. So people's price sensitivity is going to be different than it was last summer. A lot of factors that you weigh in when it's time to engineer your menu, of course.
Nice. So basically what we're saying here is that, we have our individual food costs that we have to manage, but also our menu cost, which is what we arrive at by compiling them all together and also bringing in the sales data and seeing exactly the performance of those items
Yeah, I
using
think that's
the
key.
theoretical. Sorry, go ahead.
That performance piece. No, I interrupted you, Doug. I'm sorry. That performance piece I think is really important, especially over time. It's not necessarily all that valuable as a snapshot, but if week over week you see that side of guac and chips is not selling, and then you can see how much you're actually wasting because of spoilage, because how long is an avocado good for? That why do you have that on your menu at some point? Like that becomes something that is really actually, even though it's got a great food cost percentage at a recipe level, at the menu level, it's not worth having here. It's actually dragging things down. And it's money you have sitting on a shelf, which at this moment in this climate is not okay, right? Like cut it
Yeah.
loose.
So then we harp down on that. And maybe the reason we only sold 21 of these in 24 is because somebody had the brilliant idea to add guac and chips at the end of the summer when it was almost over. So we only ran it for one day. So this year we're really focusing on making sure the servers sell that to every single table. And there's another change that as soon as we make it is going to increase our profit huge and bring our food costs down, because now just about every table that's getting sat is getting a side of guac and chips.
Another kind of, maybe minor point here is that, we all have people that we report to and who want to see these numbers. Some of you might be those people. But often you have to bring these numbers to whoever's, your boss and your owners. This is the kind of stuff that is what people are after, right? They want to see the numbers, they want to see the breakdown, and you can dig into the minutia of this by going all the way to the ingredient level or the sub recipe level. But that variance there, that $10,000 variance that you can pitch based on different changes to your menu, that's the kind of stuff that will help you kind of build out different aspects of the restaurant, or invest in marketing, or whatever you can, whatever those plans are you need to do. You can pull those numbers out from your recipes, and your engineering of those recipes. So just keep in mind this can be a really valuable tool for just planning, not just for like seeing what's happening right now, but also anticipating the future. Especially if you do seasonal menus, kind of what happened last year, you can predict what's going to happen this year, with slight variances, and you can kind of capitalize on those trends that you're seeing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great point.
And as we talked about a little bit too, is, taking a look at these numbers from a menu. I'm looking at the same summer menu that we were just looking at to get these analytics, these charts, these reports, so we can look at every one of our items. There's that farro salad as a star. There's our house salad as a star. The items that we're really selling and are profitable. And these are the ones that, anybody who's been to a menu engineering class, seminar, anything knows. You don't touch your stars. You leave them on the menu. You don't play with the recipe. Or if anything, you want to.
They're doing the work, man.
They're
Let them
doing the
shine.
work. They are paying the bills. Then you have your puzzles. They're profitable, but you got to work on selling them more. You got to get the servers to get them over that axis and make them work for you too. Plow horses, they're selling great. We got to improve their food costs. So the way to address these is to look at the ingredients in them and make better purchasing decisions. Maybe play with those portions a little bit, 3 ounces of chicken liver versus 2.75. If that improves your food cost, your customer's never going to know the difference. Not that we're trying to play a slight on anybody, but we're all trying to make money in this business and thrive. And then your dogs, just get them off the menu. There's no reason to have this. This is
It's
outside
the
of
guac and chips is a dog. I knew it.
But we know we're going to get this one selling, and we're going to put it into the star quadrant next year. So instead of taking it off the menu, that's one that'll show that way, because like I said, maybe we added it too late in the season. So
Stop buying avocado, Sergio.
okay. So yeah, there's also, a couple things that we talk about too is needing to know what items on your menu or what items you purchase really, really move the needle on your food costs here.
Right. Yeah. If you're spending time like worrying about the price of ground ginger and you really only use it in one recipe, maybe that's not where you should be putting your precious energy.
Yeah. So yeah, great way to identify, these are the items that are really moving the needle. Here's how much of it you use. Here's the ingredients you sell the most of. Here's your highest revenue items, which we can see on the chart as well. So there's a lot of analytics here, but mostly for the purpose of this conversation is just touching on our menu engineering and our items on the menu and how we address those.
Yeah, amazing. So one thing obviously we want to keep in mind is we're still in the theoretical, right? That's all we're talking about here. I mean, yes, the sales components are in here. That is actual, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that whatever's happening on the ground, in the restaurant itself, is as close as humanly possible to these theoretical numbers, right? So, yeah, what can we do, Sergio, to I guess maybe we should pop to the other slide, right? And move on to the
Yeah.
next the habits, the ability, like what can we do to really make sure that our teams are executing these dishes the way they need to be so that those numbers are as close to reality as possible.
Yeah. And really, what we're talking about here is it comes to the actual food cost is, like I said, operational oversight in the restaurant, in your kitchen. Are your cooks following the recipe? First and foremost, I know if you're launching a new restaurant, you can set that tone, you can set that base from the beginning and say, these are the recipes, this is where they live. We go through this few hundred times a month with all of you for the last 4 years of, how are we improving your actual food costs and getting, if you're running a very established restaurant and your line cooks have been with you for 5 to 10 years, first of all, kudos to you if you're keeping line cooks around that long, but they're harder to change their habits, isn't it? So we all know that, and we know that we need to change the culture in your kitchen. And that is, we're here as much as we can help remotely towards that, but it is about creating better habits, not just in your kitchen, but in your purchasing, in your accounting, in how you track and keep things up to date so that you are always looking at that most recent cost and what you can do to optimize it and to keep, everybody using the tools that are at their disposal, whether it's accurately scaling recipes to minimize on waste. You're going to close a restaurant for a week during the slowest part of the year or during mud season. I'm in New England, so there's a time of year when it just doesn't pay to be open. And so on that last day of service before you close, a lot of the recipes, you're not going to need to make the full batch. And the easy math is a half batch. A half batch might also be too much sometimes. And so having a tool that can help you easily, accurately scale a recipe to exactly how much you have to minimize your waste and not end up with a bunch of quarts of leftover product that you're going to throw out during the week that you're closed is going to make a huge difference there. Having better trained cooks because you're putting training materials in all those recipes, making sure that they're following those steps. You're going to put the upfront work building these and you're going to delegate to your sous chef to go take some pictures while next time he's making the recipe, shoot a video, make sure your teams are looking at these recipes, make sure they're using them, and that's going to make a big difference in your cost and in also the consistency of the food across multiple locations, especially having the same recipe in front of everybody. And as Doug showed, we can make a copy. This comes up a lot. Somebody will ask, how can I make a copy? I basically want the same recipe, but we have a combi oven at this restaurant and the traditional convection oven at the other. So you're going to adjust your cooking method, your cooking times, but you start with the exact same base recipe and make changes that way.
Beautiful. I like to think about this, if I had to sum up this slide into one little aphorism, I would say what gets measured gets managed. So what you measure and you are tracking, that is you managing and knowing and hitting goals because you know what the goals are. It's hard to know like what is my food cost percentage supposed to be versus what you're actually paying and what it could be. Having both parts of this is really important to understand how you're doing in your business. Both you making the decisions, as Sergio said, with purchasing and menu engineering, and then also how you're training your team and how they operate.
Yeah, it's like speaking to that point, like I remember as a line cook, I always struggled with just knowing precisely how much what goes on the plate and in terms of quantities. It was all about how it looked and just was it enough in terms of the plating and the appearance. But my chefs didn't have specific quantities for anything, and it was just expected that you kind of just knew how to do it. But that's, they also didn't know their food costs. There was no.
Is that Cowboy food costing? Did we get into that? What is Cowboy costing, Sergio?
Yeah, you will bring that up, Sergio.
Cowboy costing. So for those of us who have been around long enough, it's basically what we called it, or I think the term is still out there. I hear it sometimes referred, like I'm still doing the old cowboy costing, which historically has always meant just taking the protein, your center of plate item, and adding 10% to that cost, and then setting whatever your food cost percentage is based on that.
Apparently I was a cowboy and I didn't know it when I was an exec chef of a fine dining spot. That's exactly what we did.
Yep. That's what many places did. And one of the examples that I use a lot is, I was working in steakhouses back in the 90s where kale is not what kale is today. Kale was a piece of garnish that you threw on every plate and you never thought about the cost. So adding 10% to cover all the other stuff on the plate seemed perfect. If you would have told a farmer back then how much they'd be selling kale for in the years 2000 in the teens and in the 20s, they would think you were crazy, of course. But that's exactly what marketing can do, is turn kale into the miracle vegetable that it is today. Thank you for those prices. But yeah, you got to track everything on the plate, especially in this climate we all know, and we're all feeling it because the food industry feels what's happening in the economy first. Food is perishable. Nobody pre-bought a storage warehouse full of all the food that you're going to need for the next year or so last year to make sure that your prices didn't spike. It's all happening, and a lot of you are already feeling it. And so everything that lands on your plate is fluctuating a lot, not just the old butter roller coaster and the dairy products and the seasonal items. Everything is spiking.
This was a question that someone asked about managing price fluctuations. We're not going to go into a whole demo of the invoice processing side of Meez, but obviously join the community and come to an office hours if you want to learn more about that.
We're getting into 2.0 on the next webinar, so maybe we
2.0.
go over it then.
In the
Yeah.
next webinar, but yes, managing price fluctuations is really helpful in not this. You don't have to do it from the recipe standpoint. You can also just do it from the invoice standpoint. We have an invoice analytics platform that a lot of you probably use already. That comes with Meez at a certain tier, and that's so it's all there to be analyzed and kind of reported on, because it just takes the invoices, processes them for you, and it's there to be downloaded and kind of sorted. So
yeah, it allows you to track your price increases and decreases and just highlight those. Because I mean, Sergio, you said this a few weeks ago to me, like coming from, the wholesale industry, you're not going to do a price spike on all of your ingredients when it hits you. It's not going to be at 10% across the board.
Yeah.
It's going to be insidious and a little bit subtle. It's boiling a frog, right? Like it's one degree and 1 point up on every ingredient. So over time, that really starts to compound. So again, if you're measuring that and you're monitoring that, you're managing that. You come armed to conversations with your purveyor about like, hey, okay, so I see you have to hit me on this ingredient, but this one drives the most percentage of my food cost because we use this the most. This is the ingredient that matters. So cut me a break on the chicken breast. It's okay that you're charging me that much for parm. I understand.
Yeah.
Curious if anybody attending is in the coffee industry, because if anybody's getting hit right now, I mean, there's no coffee here, so I'm sure.
As Sarah said, though, as Sarah said, I was in imports actually in 2016 when everybody remembers the first round of tariffs happened. Actually, and actually that was by 2017, 2018 is when my job was downsized specifically for that reason. We imported high-end Parmigiano, high-end olive oils. Everything was getting hit with high tariffs. And so coming from that world, I know what your purveyors are doing right now. They might not have already brought in that shipment that's going to get hit with 20, 30% or whatever, but they are gradually increasing prices because they know that it's coming and they know that they can't hit it with you. They can't hit you with it all at once. They're doing gradual increases here as it's coming, a little percentage every week, a small percentage, because they know they're going to have to raise it eventually up to 30, 40% on stuff. And so tracking it, measuring it, keeping an eye on it week to week is crucial.
Love it.
In case we haven't even noticed, we're kind of moving gradually into the Q&A section, so please feel free to just type in any questions you have that have come up so far, and we have questions that y'all have put in as you signed up, so we just kind of been knocking some of those out. Sergio, any of the I guess one maybe kind of concluding question to start things off is just like, what is your best pro tip? And this is for Sarah too, and for anyone else listening who what is your best pro tip for staying ahead of rising food costs? Like, just if you could take away one thing, what would it be? Or yeah.
What I don't think people do enough, not it's something I didn't do enough, is taking proper inventories, taking regular proper inventories at the end of every month. And that way you're going to know, hey, we might have gotten a better price on this cheese, but we're still sitting on a wheel of the stuff that we paid more for. Or, sorry, I go to cheese every time, but all of these products that are sitting in your inventory, how much do you have left? Especially, hey, how much do you have left before the price goes up? Maybe it's time to buy a pallet of that flour before that gets hit with high pricing, anything like that. And where can not everybody has the resources for that, of course, but sometimes that might be the important investment you need to make instead of the new chairs that you were going to put on the tables. For right now, let's pump the brakes on that unless people are literally falling out of the chairs, and let's buy a pallet of something that we know drives our food costs and hold that cost as long as we can.
Buy the pallet and 5 chairs. Just replace the really bad ones.
Yes.
Mixed media art in the dining room. Good work. That's a great one, Serge. I really think it is it's twofold, right? It's paying attention to your portions, as Doug was saying. So what is your team doing? That to me is the thing, like, because we can, in this perfect world, in the SaaS world where we live, we can make this menu cost percentage a beautiful, beautiful number. But what's actually happening comes from your team. Those are the people who are holding the power. So informing them and giving them the tools that they need in order to achieve success. So if it needs to be this size spoon, it's this size spoon. We don't want to I was always against getting into one specific tool for specific measurements, but also sometimes that really helps, because to Doug's point earlier, as a cook, you don't necessarily know, you just want it to look like enough. And what is enough depends on how hungry you are in that moment. But your food cost percentage is not based on how hungry anyone is, unless you're here with a buffet. And then we would love to know how you handle it.
Oh, wait. I would just, we haven't mentioned waste yet, and waste management and waste tracking.
Totally. Yeah.
It really comes up a lot, that a lot of people ask us about. There are some tips and tricks that we can, go into maybe in a future webinar about you doing that in Meez. But yeah, I think, how often is just, stuff just tossed and no one says a word, and it's forgotten about, and there's no tracking. I mean, that's just, you have to be able to know what that is, and to empower your staff to be able to do that in a way that it makes it just kind of easy operationally to get those numbers. So
yeah. Another great example of that, Doug, and anybody who watches this was something that I did a lot in restaurants, is as much as I watch food leave the pass and go to tables, I love to watch people clearing tables and what was coming back. And a great example of that is something I just experienced recently. Had a lovely dinner at a restaurant, ordered these beautiful roasted clams that came out with arrabbiata sauce, and they were delicious. Devoured them in a second. Then there's all this sauce left. I mean, in my cook's mind, I said there was at least a 6-ounce ladle of sauce in here for 5 clams. So awesome. I went to town with the bread, dipped a bunch of bread, but even after dipping all the bread, I'd say at least half of that sauce went back to the kitchen untouched in the bowl still. And so those are the kind of things that are important to monitor. It might look awesome when it goes out, but if nobody's eating it, that's just money left on the plate, literally, that your customers aren't eating. And it's better. I think it always looks better if your customer's literally mopping up the last piece of sauce.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
All right.
Any other questions that you've picked out, Sergio, that you wanted to go over, or do you want me to throw a couple? Or obviously anyone else who's listening, feel free to chime in.
I know we had a couple of things like outdated spreadsheets. I feel like we covered that a little bit in the beginning. Cowboy costing, webinar is being recorded. Somebody asked that. Recommendations. Baker, there was actually two baking questions, and I had a cool recipe pulled up for it, unless somebody's hitting us with another question right now.
Nope, go for it.
Cool. Jumping back here, but I had a couple baking questions asking about layer cake, different layers of cakes that can be made in different sizes. So you see this whole recipe is literally a bunch of sub recipes. And sure, in this particular situation, each batch was made to be the exact batch required for this. But I think this can really address that to say, this batch of my chocolate malt frosting, or let's talk about the cake itself. Yeah, the chocolate malt cake. And see, this is a double batch, and then we're going to use a single batch here. But we can also, this can be a batch that is just the single batch, which can yield 3, 4 different cakes, depending on the different size molds that you're using, a springform mold. And then you define that when you make the actual recipe that you're only using 10 ounces of that batter versus 16 ounces of that cake batter in the ring mold versus the Kugelhof pan or anything that you're using like that that's going to change your yield and how much of the batter you're using, of course. So these are really building blocks that would let me create, a mini version of this cake for an individual or for a Valentine's Day menu or anything like that. So I hope I just knocked out 2 on that. There was also recommendations for a baker who's constantly trying new recipes, calculating food costs. But I think we talked about that a little bit in others too when we're looking at some of these. Well, so many of these are sub recipes, so we drill into one of these to look at the ingredients. And we can go in and see, you're trying different ingredients. Hey, butter's one we play with a lot. It can make or break the difference of a good pastry. So maybe we're using Plugra and it's costing us a little bit more. We can plug that in and see that change in real time without making anything drastic. We didn't have to involve purchasing to buy the new butter and map it in. We just made the change ourselves to see what that's going to do to this chocolate malt frosting and then ultimately to the cost of that whole cake that we were looking at. And the adjustment I made in the sub recipe, of course, translates here, but this recipe is a bit of a mess and missing a bunch of costs in my demo account.
Can I also throw one more thing in there, Sergio?
Sure.
To Danielle, who asked about like constantly making new recipes and calculating food costs at the same time. If you can go back to that butter ingredient page for me, Sergio.
Mm-hmm.
One other tip, I already said this about the recipe, but also your ingredients also have the ability to make a copy of that. So if you click on the same 3 dots that you would on a recipe, you can also make a copy of your ingredients. So if you're kind of weighing out, okay, I have these different quality ingredients, I want to start making sure my ingredient database is specific enough so that I know kind of what I'm looking at. Yeah, you can name the ingredient itself based on the vendor or based on the product or even put the price in there, whatever it is that you want to clarify, so that when you see all of the butter you have available to you when you're building your recipes, they're all going to be just next to each other, and you can just pick whichever one you want really quickly from the database. So
Fancy butter, cheap butter.
cheap butter, fancy butter, etc., French butter,
Right.
all the butters. And then so just keep that in mind. It's a really helpful way to kind of just quickly manage your ingredient database, so you can pull in the different items that you care about and see the cost differences jumping up and down. All right, cool. Only a couple minutes left. I think we covered quite a lot.
Do we have one other question in there?
We probably have
Just one? I know we did a lot.
Um,
We are going to do, as we said, 2.0 on food costing. That is on the 27th. So that's 2 weeks from today. It's a little earlier in the day as well. Sergio and Doug will both be back. And I know also upcoming, the Meez team is going to be at NRA. So if anybody is attending NRA and you want to hang out, you want to chat with Josh or anybody else from the team, we're cool too. Please let us know that you're coming. We'd love to see you and, talk about food costs or anything else. And yeah,
And we're talking
everybody.
about the National Restaurant Association show in Chicago.
Yes, that is correct. The National Restaurant.
I know when it's
Association.
Sarah plugging it sounds like she attends the National Rifle Association every year too. So
No, I mean, no. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining us. This was a pleasure. And thanks for hanging. We still have quite a few attendees, so we appreciate you sticking it out. This will be recorded, as we said, and will be posted to the community, so you'll be able to come back to it. And thank you. And bring any other questions to 2.0, and we'll get in a little deeper on the how to and all the fun tools that we didn't show today.